Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our series, CAGED Theory. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you the CAGED system with minor chords. First off, if you like all the diagrams for this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, CAGED Theory. But I am working on it as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching this lesson. If it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that'll allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 3 from our series, CAGED Theory. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So now you understand how the CAGED system applies to major chords, I'm going to explain how it also applies to minor chords. And this is an important step in understanding the CAGED system that many teachers leave out or never get to. And I think it's a really important step that you need to understand because the majority of songs don't just have major chords in them. So if you're just learning the CAGED system for major chords, it's a pretty useless system in my opinion. So I'm going to show you how you can use it to find minor chords as well. So now you know that the CAGED system is the open chords C, A, G, E, D, and those are major chords. If we turn those into minor chords and have C minor, A minor, G minor, E minor, and D minor, now we can use those open chords and turn them into movable chords like we did with the major chords. And this first one right here is supposed to say C minor instead of C major. So this first C minor is not a very common minor chord to play in open position. It's pretty tough because you have to really block out this first string. Otherwise you have a major third ringing out with a minor third, which would then sound horrible and it wouldn't be a minor chord anymore. So it's not a very common chord, but it is possible to play in open position. A minor is obviously a really common open chord that if you are taking this lesson, I'm assuming you know how to play this chord and use it all the time. G minor is not very common, although it's possible to play. It's a little tougher than other open chords, but that's definitely one that's possible to play in open position. It's just a big stretch. E minor is obviously just as common as A minor. Those are two of the most common minor chords in open position, so I'm assuming you use that chord all the time. And D minor is very common as well. It's not as commonly used as A minor and E minor for beginners, but it definitely is a chord you need to learn early on as a beginner. So if we do the same system that we did with the major chords, we'll just start with the C minor open chord. If we move that up half a step, now we have a C sharp minor using the C minor shape chord. And it's not a bar chord, you're not barring anything with this shape, but this is a very useful minor chord. And this is actually, in my opinion, easier to play than when it's in the open position because it's easier to block out this first string. And since there's no open strings, we're turning these all into movable chords. You can move this anywhere on the fretboard. If I move it all the way up to the 10th fret, the lowest note being on the 10th fret, then I'd have a G minor using the C minor shape. The next chord in CAGED would be an A chord because we did C, now we're on A. So we're looking at an A minor open chord. That's a very common chord like I was talking about. Move that up half a step. Now you have a B flat minor bar chord using the A minor shape. And this is one of the first bar chords that you learn, very common bar chord used all the time. If you play bar chords, you're just going to use it all the time. So if you already play bar chords, I'm assuming you know this one. And again, this is B flat minor because my roots are on B flat. When I was in the open position, the roots were on A. That's the only reason it's a B flat minor now. I can move this anywhere on the fretboard. If I move the lowest note up to the 7th fret, now it's an E minor bar chord using the A minor shape. Next one in CAGED is G. We went from C to A, now we're on G, so it's G minor since we're looking at minor chords. And like I was saying, this isn't a very common open chord to play. Most beginners don't play this because it's a pretty hard stretch, but it is a possible chord to play and it is a useful shape. And if you turn this into a movable chord by moving it up half a step, so this is an A flat minor bar chord using the G minor shape, and just like the G major bar chord that we created from the G major open chord, this is a really difficult chord to play. This might even be tougher than the G major bar chord that's created. So just like with the G major, we can simplify it and get a simpler shape that's a lot easier to play. And the first way we can do that is by removing this highest note, and that gives us a simplified version. We're still on A flat minor using the G minor shape, but it's a simplified version. This is actually still pretty tough to reach, and if you're not used to playing more difficult chords, you'll probably really struggle with that. So if you want to make it really simple, remove this note as well, and you'd end up with this shape, and this is much easier to play and useful because your lowest note is the root. So this is an option for simplifying the G minor bar chord shape. Or another thing we could do, instead of keeping the low notes and the root in the bass, we can remove the root and simplify this shape, and we end up with this shape. And now it's still an A flat minor bar chord using the G minor shape, but it's actually an inversion because the flat 3 is in the bass instead of the root, so it's actually first inversion. But this is a useful shape to use in certain situations as well. Then if we go back to the one that has the root on the lowest note, this simplified version of the G minor bar chord shape, we can move this anywhere up the fretboard. If we move the lowest note up to the 7th fret, we'd end up with a B minor bar chord using the G minor shape because our root notes are on B now. The next chord is an E chord because we've gone through C, A, G, now we're on E. And since we're in minor, we're talking about an E minor chord. So if we take the E minor open chord, which is a very common open chord to play as a beginner, move that up half a step, now we'd have an F minor bar chord using the E minor shape. And this is an extremely common bar chord to use. If you play bar chords at all, I'm sure you already use this chord. And then again, we can move this anywhere on the fretboard. If I move the lowest note up to the 10th fret, I'd be playing a D minor bar chord using the E minor shape. The last chord we're looking at is a D chord because we've gone through C, A, G, E, now we're on D. So we're looking at D minor since we're looking at minor chords. So we'd be looking at a D minor open chord. Again, this is a very common open chord, not as common as the A minor or E minor. Usually you don't learn it as soon as you learn the A minor or E minor when you're learning guitar, but it's still one of the chords you would learn as a beginner, so it's very common. If we move that up half a step, we'd end up with an E flat minor chord using the D minor shape. It's not a bar chord because we're not barring anything, but it's a movable chord just like all the others. And it's E flat because our root notes are on E flat, obviously. And this isn't that common of a chord that a lot of people play, but it's a very useful chord to play. It's pretty easy to play. It's easier than a lot of bar chords, so it's one that I recommend learning because you can get a lot of use out of it. And again, we can move this anywhere up the fretboard. If we move our lowest note up to the 7th fret, we'd be on A. Our root notes would be on A, so we'd have an A minor chord using the D minor shape. And then again, just like with the major chords, you can play one chord up and down the fretboard. So you can use the minor CAGED chords just like we did with the major CAGED chords. So now you're not just stuck to open position or playing the more common bar chords. You can now play them up and down the whole fretboard. So that's how you can use the CAGED system to find minor chords up and down the fretboard. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson where I'm going to show you how you can use the CAGED system when you play chord progressions. And be sure to download the e-guide. All the diagrams are in there, and be sure to subscribe because we have at least one new lesson every day.